A week or so before my 10th birthday, I walked to the corner store with a $5 bill and picked up a jar of ragu for my mum. On my way home, a man I'd never seen before fell in step with me and began talking. "Hi," he said cheerfully. "My name is Dr. Ramsay. I'm a pediatrician. Do you know what a pediatrician is?" I walked along silently, not replying, and fervently hoping he would just take that as a sign and just leave me alone. Subtleties were not his strong suit though, because he kept right on chattering. "Are your parents looking for a pediatrician for you? Of course, you're almost a big girl now. You'll be needing another kind of doctor soon, won't you? That's okay though. They can still bring you to me until then. What's your name? You have beautiful hair. I was just on my way to get some suckers from the candy jar in my office. Do you like suckers?" Thankfully, we were nearing my house, so I ran forward, up the back steps and into the kitchen door. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a very long, very scary ordeal. It didn't take long after that for Dr. Ramsay to start showing up. At first it seemed benign enough, at least to a kid. He would drive past nearly every day smiling and waving. I told my mum, who said maybe he was just on his way home from work. But then the phone calls began. One day my dad called me into the living room and sat me down. He asked me about the day that Dr. Ramsay followed me home and if I talked to him. He said that I wasn't in trouble, but that I needed to tell him the truth. I told him no, and he asked if I was sure. Could I be forgetting something? I told him no again, and he frowned, and then he said, "Then how comes he knows your name?" And I didn't know. It turns out that's not all he knew. He knew my sister's name as well. Pretty soon, neither myself or my sister were allowed to answer the phone. He called several times a day at first. Neither of us knew what he was saying. Then, one night, one of my brothers told me that he was telling my parents that he was going to hurt me and my sister. Things got a little bit complicated after that. My dad had called the police, but as this was before there was any stalking laws, there was nothing they could do. They told my parents to call back if he tried anything. My dad then called a friend that he had from back in the day who happened to be a cop. For the next month, my dad's friend escorted me to and from school. Suddenly, life as I knew it became to a screeching halt. I couldn't walk to school alone. I couldn't play outside. I couldn't even walk to the supermarket. When access to me was completely denied, things escalated. It was around this time he began threatening my sister as well. Then one afternoon, my sister, two of my brothers, my mum and I were in the kitchen. One of my brothers saw a glimpse of a man standing in the garage. All of a sudden, Dr. Ramsay came bolting out of the garage, my brothers chasing after him. They ran all the way to the Cherokee Park where he lost them in the trees. My parents called the police again, but nothing came of it. The only information they had was a description and a name that was almost certainly fake. A couple of weeks later, we woke to find our dog hanging from the side porch. She was a gorgeous saddleback German Shepherd, born the same day that I was. We were all devastated. The cops said that there was no evidence that it was him and they ruled it accidental, but none of us believed that at all. His phone calls became more informative in the meantime. He would talk about who was home and who wasn't. If my brother would say that my dad was home, he would tell him who was really in the house. He also would talk about the house itself, about the window in the kitchen he could easily open with a knife from the outside, even when it was locked, and about the French doors that connected the living room to the side porch and how the lock could be fine-angled from the outside if you jiggled it just right. That night my dad put some carpenter nails at the bottom of the French doors until he could get a new lock ordered. My parents had to go to a company event for my dad's work. My older brothers were at Saints West roller skating rink. My sister was on the phone with her best friend. My little brother was on the floor asleep. I was watching Devo on the midnight special with Wolfman Jack. It was late. Suddenly, the top of the French door swung inwards, and in the few milliseconds before the nails in the bottom caused them to snap back, I could see silhouette. My sister whipped the phone at the television and we ran up the stairs. About halfway up we realised that our little brother was still asleep on the living room floor. As quietly as we could we slipped back down the stairs to get him. We all went into our bedroom and we didn't turn on the light. This way we could see outside. We watched out of the window for a while, and when we didn't find him we crept down the hall to our brother's room for a look. We looked down and we could see someone standing at the back door. He knocked loudly. "What do you want?" my sister asked out the window. He stepped back and he said, "Is this the Mercy residence? I have a pizza delivery. Can you come and open the door?" She scoffed at him, declaring she was not stupid. She could see that he didn't have a pizza and she was calling the cops. He left. A short while later, my brothers returned home. We told them what had happened and they walked around the yard watching for him. They came back in and things settled down. By now, we'd pretty much given up calling the cops because it never helped, so we went back in, each of us carrying a knife, except for my youngest brother who was still asleep. Eventually, one of my brothers went into the kitchen to get a bowl of cereal as a snack. You know that sensation you get when you can just feel someone watching you? Yeah, he had that in spades. He kept looking around the kitchen, through the doorway into the dining room, at the windows. He didn't see anything, but he could still feel eyes on him. So we went closer to the door to try and see better. The kitchen lights were reflecting on the windows out of the door, so he still could not see. He stepped closer, then closer again, until he was right up to the door, then cupped his hands either side of his head so he could see. There, on the other side of the window pane, was Dr. Ramsay smiling back at him. He turned to yell for my older brothers, and when he looked back again, he was gone. They went out again to look for him, but they couldn't see him. The next night, we were at the table playing Crazy Eights, and my brother was restless. My sister asked him what was wrong, and he said he always felt like any minute now there would be a boom, boom, boom on the door or a window. Almost immediately after he finished his sentence, boom, boom, boom on the window right behind him. In the chaos, the two eldest ran out, but he was already gone. A couple of weeks later, I was at school and we were outside on the playground during recess. I was swinging upside down when I saw that now familiar blue Ford Galaxy cruising by, moving slowly. There he was, smiling and waving. He called my name and I ran to the teacher and told her. The school had been told about him and they took me inside right away and they called my mum. That same day, my mum had gotten a call from the school office asking her to verify that my dad was picking me up, as he had called to say that he was on his way. He wasn't. Not long after that, I woke up one night thirsty. I went down to the kitchen for a drink and there, sitting alone in the dark, was my dad. On the table was a gun. He was tired of the police waiting until Dr. Ramsay tried something. He was tired of his children being terrorised. He was tired of being afraid every time we left for work that something would happen to us while he was gone. I sat with him for a long time watching before he sent me back to bed. These events and many more took place over a period of about 18 months. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was all over. He had vanished from my lives. The phone calls, the drive-by with creepy waves, everything. For a long time during and after the Dr. Ramsay days, I would have reoccurring nightmare, in which I would wake up to find him standing over me as I slept. It took a long time before I felt like a kid again. I found out years later that when he was calling, Dr. Ramsay would tell my parents that he was going to rape and kill me, and later my sister, and that there was nothing that they could do about it. I don't know what happened to him when he disappeared. I don't know if he was in a car wreck, locked in a prison, in a coma, but sometimes I wonder if the wait ended for my dad when he was sitting in the darkened kitchen one night. I don't know, and I'm not sure if I want to. I grew up in a very small town where you knew everyone and so on. Because we lived so remote, we didn't often have fresh fruit and vegetables in stock. We had a fruit and vegetable truck that would drive down every second Tuesday while some people would grow their own fruit and vegetables. The guy who drove the truck parked in 3 places in town: the Point, Midtown, and the High Banks. That was his last stop, and it was at the end of my street. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, my mother would give me some money to spend to get fruit and veg. The main important ones to her were tomatoes and potatoes. Originally, when I started walking down there were no issues, yet this neighbour with a tall fence started stopping me to talk to me whenever I walked down the street. I didn't like talking to him because he was weird, annoying and pushy, yet as a kid I had to stop and listen to him. It started to get so bad that he would wait for me every second Tuesday to stop me and make him talk to him. One day, because of it, I missed a truck due to him stopping me for so long and blocking me so I couldn't walk away. My mum gave me a good hiding with a wooden spoon for missing the truck because of it. So I tried to avoid him when I went down to the truck. He started swearing at me because I wouldn't stop and talk to him, and I was also running around him when he tried to block my path. One afternoon there were no tomatoes, and being a kid I thought I might get another hiding, so I was sulking on the walk home. Forgetting about the neighbour who suddenly jumped out and asked me why I was so sad, I said it was because they had no tomatoes. He told me that he was growing his own tomatoes and that I could have some for free, so I agreed to go into his yard. But when I stood in the yard, he tried to get me to go into his house, like taking me by my free hand and trying to lead me in. I cannot type in proper detail of what happened next, but I will attempt it. It's like everything slowed down. All the hair on my arm stood up and I got goosebumps. My hearing got really clear and I could hear all the sounds of the birds and the wind. Also, it was late afternoon, but it looked darker than usual. I also could smell everything from the wet grass to the dead leaves, dirt and the salts in the air. To mention, at the time we had lots of missing cats and dogs in the street. When I got closer to the door, I saw a crusty potato sack in the yard with flies around it. There was coppery marks on it and it smelt like rotten mince. The inside of his doorway was pitch black. I started feeling a mix of dread and illness. Then he turned back and smiled, showing his teeth. I immediately pulled my hand back and ran home. I told my idiotic mother what had happened, who was actually disappointed that I didn't get free tomatoes. I sort of think that I may have got murdered if I went in there, since the feeling I got when he was trying to lead me in was so sickly I almost vomited when I got home. I've never experienced anything like that before or after, and I never want to. It was the middle of the night, maybe 12 or 1 in the morning, and I had snuck out to get a bag of chips or something from the gas station a few blocks away from my house. It was the middle of December and it was snowing pretty heavily outside. For the record, I was 14 or 15 at the time. I've always been pretty small, about 5'4" in height and about 115 pounds in weight. I'm female, but I've always had short hair and kind of a boyish face. The gas station was completely empty, besides a woman behind the cash register, who I remember had been far too busy filing her nails to pay too much attention. I had been picking through some of the chip bags to find something good when I heard a ding of the door as someone entered the small gas station. I didn't bother to look to see who it was. When I finally found what I was looking for, I turned and started heading towards the refrigerated section for a drink, before seeing a person who had just walked through the door. It was a tall, thin man, maybe 6'2", with brown hair, a red tucker hat, and a scruffy beard. He looked like he was in his late 30s or 40s. I was surprised that I didn't even recognise the man. I lived in a small mountain town and everybody knew everybody. Oddly enough, he was wearing a short-sleeved t-shirt and shorts despite it being freezing cold outside. His shirt and pants were covered in grass stains, as if he had just been working on a lawn or something. He turned to me and smiled with a toothy grin before moving away from the door to the refrigerated area so that I could grab what I needed. I knew I shouldn't have seen anything wrong with this, but something about the grin and the way his eyes looked me over was already kind of a red flag. I've always been a very nervous and paranoid person. I moved in and opened the door, quickly grabbing a drink and backing off. Before I could turn away, I heard the man's raspy voice as he spoke to me. "Hey, "You look familiar," the man said. He had a somewhat southern accent, which wasn't that uncommon considering where I lived. "Oh yeah," I responded, not sure what to say to him. He introduced himself as Thomas before leaning against the door. "Why is a young man like you doing out this late?" he asked. Again, I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't a boy for one thing, but I didn't bother to correct him. I was just getting a snack," I responded, trying to inch my way away, trying to give off the hint that I didn't want to talk, yet the man just trailed behind me. "Do you know my daughter?" he asked me, cutting me off on one of the aisles. "Well, who is your daughter?" I asked shakily in response. The man frowned at me and his eyes narrowing in my direction. He refused to tell me her name, claiming that he didn't want boys touching his daughter. I was confused by the sudden change in mood, so I didn't say anything else. I started making my way towards the cash register before he cut me off again. "Do you need a ride? It's cold out there," he said, getting uncomfortably close. At this point, I could smell the alcohol on Thomas's breath. It made me very uncomfortable. "No, thank you," I said, trying to move around him. He insisted, and yet again I refused. I moved to try and push past him, bumping into a metal shelf. A can of chips fell from the shelf, hitting the floor. The lady behind the cash register had looked up from what she was doing, noticing me and the man. "Are you ready to check out?" she asked me, glaring at Thomas. I nodded, and then the man moved out of my way. I paid for the chips and the drink before thanking the woman and moving out of the gas station, but it didn't end there. When I began to walk down the snowy road, I saw the man get into his truck before getting out a minute later. I was already quite a way away when he began walking in the same direction I was. I would have called someone for help at this point, but I didn't have a phone at the time. I had quickly quickened my pace, and eventually he turned round and went home. I don't want to know what would have happened if this man would have kept following me. So, Thomas, I don't think we should ever meet again. I was walking home from school. I only lived a 10-minute walk away. The area was always busy and there were 3 schools within 4 streets of each other. There's a huge busy alleyway in front of the school which I always cut through because it was just easier than walking around it. I never had a problem before or after this day. I'm a very paranoid person and I get nervous about things going on around me in the outside world, so I noticed this man straight away. I'll never forget him. He was much taller than I am. At the time I was barely scraping 5 foot tall, wearing a beige and blue plaid jacket and dark blue jeans. He was white, he had light brown hair and he had medium length ringlets. He wasn't much more than 5 or 6 steps behind me at any given time, so I was on edge straight away. Once I got out of the alleyway, I turned onto the next street. 2 or 3 seconds later, he came around the corner too. He was so close I could hear him breathing. I was trying to rationalize it in my head. He's just going the same way. Why would he follow you? He's not too close to you. That's all in your mind, etc. I decided to cross the road and just get out of his way. He crossed over too, so I crossed back. So did he. And I crossed one more time to get back on the side of the road that I needed to be on anyway. He crossed as well. At this point, I thought he was most probably following me. The house I lived in at the time had a small alleyway behind it, and our garden gate was down there. It was a massive gate, easily over 8 foot, set into a 9 foot solid brick wall. Our garden gate was usually locked and bolted because we lived on a high street and drunk, shady people had made unwelcome appearances in our garden fairly often. I made the extremely stupid decision of bolting down this alleyway and running through the back gate. I had no idea if it was unlocked. Even if it was, I had no idea if the back door was unlocked. My mother could have been out getting my siblings if my stepfather was busy. I had no clue. What a moron. The second I started running, he did too. I bolted down this alley. He's catching up to me. He's much bigger than I am, has much longer legs, but I got to the gate. Thank God it was unlocked. I threw it open and bolted it. Just as I bolted it, he slammed against it from the other side. He was kicking and punching the gate, screaming. Then I could hear him trying to climb up the other side of the wall. Thankfully my mum was in. The back door was unlocked. I ran inside and told her what had happened. She opened the back door and screamed at him to clear off and that she was phoning the police, etc. His hands disappeared from the top of the wall pretty fast, and we heard him running away. We did phone the police and I gave them a description. We never heard anything back. I never saw him again, not even around town, but I suppose in this amount of time he could have changed his appearance. I was just lucky that the gates were unlocked that day. Honestly, the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me. Not the scariest by far, but definitely the creepiest. So, weird paedophile crazy dude, let's not meet.